Welcome to Mustard Bikes. Today we've got the 2017 CBR1000 on the bench, and we're going to run you step by step how to do an install for a Mustard Bikes fender eliminator. First off, you're going to need some tools. You're going to need a 5mm Allen key, a 3mm Allen key, a Phillips head screwdriver, a 10mm spanner, maybe two, and a 10mm socket, preferably with a long extension on it. You'll also need your key, and of course the Mustard Bikes fender eliminator that came in your kit. So to start off with, we're going to remove the pillion seat using the key and put that to the side. Next up, we need to remove the rider's seat as well as the strap and a few bolts in here. To remove the rider's seat, we need to take out the two bolts under each corner, which are a 5mm Allen key. Undo them until they're loose, and the seat should pop right out. Lift it up and out it comes. We're then going to remove the strap, which has two 5mm bolts as well. And the strap comes out like that. Next we'll need the Phillips head screwdriver. We're going to take out these two plastic plugs on either side there. They have an outer ring and a centre ring with the Phillips head. Unscrew the Phillips head till it's about 5mm out. In some cases you may find that the outer ring will twist with it, in which case you need to hold it in place. And that's the part that's come out there. So do that for both sides. This one's spinning round, so we're just going to use the Allen key to hold the outer ring in place. Following that, you need your 3mm Allen key. We're going to remove these four bolts holding on the upper fairing. Now that we've removed these four bolts, we're ready to take this upper panel off. So the upper panel is connected to the lower panel by a number of clips along the edges. To undo it, we have to separate the two halves. The easiest way to do that is from underneath. You will require a bit of force to get it undone. Just note that this black part at the top above the taillight is part of the same part, although it is separately clipped together. So once you've got this upper side disconnected, pull the fairing upwards and backwards, and you'll see that the whole part will come off like that. As you can see, this is a separate part, although we'll leave it in place for the time being. Next, we're going to have to remove the locking plate. To remove the locking plate, we remove these four 10mm bolts. The locking plate doesn't have any cables or wires attached to it, so once the bolts are undone, it just lifts out of place. Next we're going to remove the tail light. To do this, there are four screws up here. Undo the two that are closest to the front of the bike first. And place those aside. Next, undo the two that hold in the tail light. When you take these out, just be cautious, there is a small washer here. Place those aside as well. Undo this plug by pushing on the back and pulling the two halves apart. This should allow you to take the tail light out. First, push the lower fairing down a little bit until it clips out. This will give you enough room to lift the tail light out of place. Sometimes these small clips will fall off. Simply slot them back in place. Next, we're going to take this red part of the fairing off. To do that, we need to undo these two screws here and these two screws here. Once again, just with the Phillips head. The red portion of fairing is held in place with a series of clips, just like the upper, but different styles. Start by undoing the top parts here. Pull the two sides down so they pull out from the lugs. Then gently separate the two halves on either side. Generally, you'll need to push the red fairing backwards and the black fairing forwards. Once it's unclipped, the whole fairing should slide back and out. Next, we need to undo the plugs for the rear fender. That is this orange and blue one here, and you may be able to see there's a couple of clips. If you lift those clips up, the plug should slide out. You'll also need to undo this one, which is for the rear fender eliminator light. Next, we undo the fender eliminator by undoing the 4 bolts in here. Use your spanner to hold the bolt from here and access the nut with the extension and the 10mm socket from the outside. The black fairing is quite flexible and you should be able to move it out of the way easy enough to gain full access. Remove all the nuts and bolts bar one. Leave the last one in place just so that the rear fender doesn't fall out. Now carefully take the nut off the last one. And then while holding the rear fender, it's a little bit tricky this bit, push the bolt through and then gently pull the rear fender away from the bike. This will give you the rear fender, which we're now going to disassemble so we can fit the indicators to the fender eliminator. So now that we've got the rear fender off the bike, we need to disassemble it. To do this, we need to undo this screw in here and these two screws here. So once we've undone these two screws, the top cap from the fender should come off. As such. This will give us access to the indicators. So the next step is to remove the indicators. For this you'll need an 8mm spanner. Undo the screws on the sides of the indicator. They're quite long and you'll need to unscrew them a fair way before they'll come out. So there comes the screw. Behind the screw is a small metal keeper. Pull this out. It goes through this whole rubber part here, so it takes a bit of pulling. That comes separate like that. Once you've done that, the indicator is essentially loose. You need to pull the wire through from here. The easiest way to do that is just separate these two halves and pull the wire through like that. Just be careful when you pull the plug through that you don't catch the plug. You can then pull the full indicator through, completely removing it from the standard fender. You then also need to take this rubber grommet out, which just pulls out like that. We obviously do this to both sides. To fit the indicator back to the fender eliminator, we need to use these rubber spaces, these metal spaces on the rubber block. Fit those to the block first. Like so. We then fit that entire assembly to the fender eliminator. I'm just making sure I get the right side here. Now this is a little bit of fiddling to make sure you get it all the way through. And sometimes a screwdriver will help just to pop that rubber through. And just pull it from the back and we're through. And just straighten the whole lot up from the side. So now we can feed the indicator wire through. And fit the little metal keeper plate. So the long part of the keeper plate goes up against the wire. And push that one all the way through. Like that. Then we'll use the original bolt through the second hole, line that up with the indicator and screw that in place. Just make sure that everything's clipped through in the base there. And just do it up until it's nice and snug. Take the wire for the indicator and feed it through the square hole in the bottom of the fender eliminator. Then repeat the same for the other side. So now we've got both our indicators fitted, and we've also taken this opportunity to tidy up the wiring with some of the cable ties that are included in the kit. The last thing you need to do before we start fitting this to the bike is fit the OEM plug. Now, we've already done it to this kit to save time. You can find the instructions on how to do this in one of our other YouTube videos. So we take the OEM plug and plug it in to here. This is now ready to fit and assemble to the bike. So the next step is to fit it to the bike. To start off, we feed the wiring around the plastic bit all the way through over in this direction. We then need one of the original bolts that held the rear fender on. Feed it up from underneath, and just be cautious, there's a little tab here that needs to go above the fender eliminator so that it pulls the plastic up when you go in there. Then take the one bolt and just slot it through one of the bolt holes to hold it in place. You can then take the rest of the bolts and bolt the whole thing in place as a standard rear fender. Once again, there's a fair bit of flexibility in the black plastic here, so don't be afraid to pull it out of the way to get it on there. Then use your spanner to give them that last little bit of a tighten. Take all the wires for the fender eliminator and plug them in. Obviously the orange goes in the orange and the blue goes in the blue. Just take your key for a moment, turn the ignition on and just check that the LED bolt is lit up and that both your indicators are working. Next we're going to fit the red undertail and then fit the top back and get the bike back looking as it should be. So now we're going to fit the under tray back to the bike. You'll notice there's a couple of lugs on here. We need to fit these back in a particular order. Start by making sure that these two go into their relevant slots underneath into the black plastic part. Secondly, we're going to make sure that this one goes in the right spot, followed by these four on the outsides, and lastly we're going to put these ones in place. So slide it around the fender eliminator that we've just installed. We'll just get this plug out of the way. And then as mentioned, start with the two lugs at the bottom. You will find it'll need a little bit of coercion up here just to get it up above the fender. So then we go for the one at the back here, just slots in place. The ones on the sides, generally with these, you just need to push them down until they clip into place. And then lastly, these little side ones. So that panel is now completely in place. You can also line up these screw holes with the two tabs on the side there. Next, we're going to screw these four screws and these two screws and these two screws back in place. Following that, we need to refit the tail light. Place the lead back through under here as it was originally, and just slot the tail light back in place. Plug that back in place and make sure these two tabs are aligned again. Then we're going to put those two screws back in place. Followed by the two screws for the tail light. And don't forget to put the little washers back in place. So we're getting very close now. Make sure that this is out of the way. There's a little clip under here that the wire should be under. And then we put the seat lock back in place. And use the 10mm to put them back in place. Following this, we place the top fairing back in place. You just need to notice these four tabs here, they line up with these. So we start by putting those in place, just laying it down and getting them aligned. And you should find that once they are, the fairing will slide forward. So once it's slid forward, we then need to clip this rear part back together. Just make sure that when you do, that these two tabs that are up underneath here clip back onto the tail light. So that should all clip back together like that. We then replace the 3mm Allen bolts, of which there are 4. So last thing before we put the rider's seat back on is we put these plastic plugs back in. Then use the Phillips head just to screw that head back in. You may need to hold them if they spin around with another tool. Now we can put the rider's seat back on, slot it in at the front, and do up the two 5mm Allen bolts at the back. We then fit the strap for the pillion seat back in place. If you're confused about which way around this went, you'll see this has a little tab here with a couple of prongs. Those prongs just go around the seat locking plate there. screw all that back in place. Then we have one last step to do. With the pillion seat fitted, all that's left to do is fit your number plate. If you've watched this video and you're not confident fitting this product yourself, please take it to your local dealership. They'll be able to get the whole lot fitted for you in about 30 to 45 minutes. And they'll probably do it with a little less struggle than you. We'd like to thank you for watching this video and choosing a Mustard Bikes product. Thank you.